really address some of our most pressing problems. And so our funding supports research collaborations where we connect the talent that's our post-secondary institutions, so that's all of you, to the communities that are trying to address the challenge. And so for my role, I tend to support all of the applications to our programs. And beyond that, I also try to connect the communities that are looking for help to just the right researchers to actually sort of solve the challenge. And that makes Mitacs a little bit different from funding agencies, and more really sort of a facilitator for innovation that can really drive change. So today's event is brought to us by FASS, so the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, which is the biggest faculty that we have at SFU, and it's also fair to say I think that's the most diverse. It's my absolute pleasure to be working with Kate Slady. She's our Associate Dean for Graduate Studies here at FASS, and she's been instrumental in bringing events like this available, making them available to you all. We'll kick things off with a presentation that Tara is going to give on what community engaged research actually is for those of you who are sort of new to this kind of research and are sort of curious what that actually entails. And then I'm very happy to be facilitating a conversation between two really amazing collaborations between researchers at SFU and community partners that Mitacs has supported. And we'll also have Kate on the panel to sort of address a few questions around what sort of participating in these kinds of collaborations might do for your career path as graduate students. And I believe that is almost everything for me. You will all be able to actually jump into the conversation and shape it a little bit. That's why CERi has sort of set this up so lovely as a very sort of communal circle. So I hope you'll all feel free to join our conversation later with your own questions and points or challenges that you have encountered. And with that, I'll hand it off to Tara.
Thank you. Before we continue, I just want to acknowledge that we're on the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish people. At CERi, so community engaged research has always been done by Indigenous communities, but it hasn't been called that, but that's how they make decisions. It's engaging with their community, and we take a lot of cues from them and involve Indigenous people and support Indigenous-led research as much as possible. We see that as an actionable strategy around decolonization at the university. And it's not perfect, but we're trying to live up to those values as much as we can. I also want to express my gratitude to the nations for defending the land and water that supports our life systems and the work that they've been doing around that for thousands of years. So deep gratitude to them for that. Okay, so I'm just going to give a quick-ish, as quick as I can, overview of CERi and community engaged research in general, what it is and what we do, and then we're going to jump right into a discussion. So just a bit about me. I'm a mom. Those are my two kids. I feel like I need to bring that into the space because it's a huge motivator for what I do, being at this age. I come from a background of communication and media. I did my PhD in communication. I focused a lot on youth engagement and public engagement. So my first kind of forte into communication research was with Apathy as Board, which is a national youth engagement organization. They're still my partner on my postdoc. And then I kind of veered more into the climate communication space over the past 2 or 3 years with a fellowship I did with the David Suzuki Foundation before I came to CERi. So that's kind of what brings me to my role now. I'm just curious how much folks know about community engaged research. So if 1 is, it's a completely new concept to me, and 10 is I'm actively working in it and have been for a while, maybe if folks could just give me the number that they feel they are.
Oh, we have a whole range. I mean, from 1 to 10, everything.
Okay.
Amazing.
Nice. Okay. Good to know. So this is our space, obviously. We have a wonderful team of about, it fluctuates between 6 and 8, depending on what we're working on. You'll see some some of them around here. Well, I won't go through everybody's names, but they're there. You can check them out on our website. They're wonderful. Okay, so what is community engaged research? So I found that this quote seems to sum it up nicely. Community engaged research is an approach to research that creates space for communities, community members, and community-based organizations to work in collaborative partnerships with academic researchers. So it's pretty broad. In our fellowship, we really dive into how it shows up on a spectrum. So it can be everything from very deeply engaged, where you're working with community members and community organizations to come up with research questions, to analyze research, to really dig in that way. Or it can be on the other end of the spectrum, where you're just kind of working with a community organization to inform research direction, and they're not part of it on an everyday basis, but they're kind of like helping to guide and co-create the process. So it can look very different on that spectrum depending on a whole bunch of factors that are associated with it. But it kind of comes down to the kind of core question of, are the people most affected by the problem at the table, and do they have decision-making roles? So that's kind of the way I like to think of like the test of community-engaged research is like, are you working with the people who are associated with the research question, the people who are on the ground? It doesn't necessarily need to be like the frontline people, but the people who are dealing with the issue on a daily basis. Are they involved in the research question, and do they have decision-making ability to, influence the decisions you're making related to your research, with the understanding that they have knowledge that you don't have, that assumption that like, we work a lot with community researchers on the opioid crisis, for example, and work a lot with peer researchers, and there's community researchers out there who have experience with the opioid crisis that I could never ever have. They have a PhD in that, in my opinion. Like they have an incredible depth of knowledge that I wouldn't otherwise be able to access, and having that respect for people and allowing them to inform the direction of the research because of their experience is kind of where we begin with community engaged research. At CERi we boiled it down to 10 ethical principles. There's more or less depending on what sort of sector or faculty you're in, but we sort of work off these. I won't go through them right now, but we do have an ethical principles document on our website that goes through each one and describes them and like examples of how they show up. But I just wanted to share them here so you get a sense of like where we're trying to situate ourselves. As I mentioned off the top, decolonizing research is a big part of our work. So we try to, coming from the understanding that traditionally research has caused a lot of damage to Indigenous communities and been used to steal land and other things. And so we keep that front and center in our mind and try to encourage and support Indigenous-led research as much as we can, and teach decolonizing principles through our fellowship program in collaboration with Indigenous faculty. I won't go through this in depth, but this is more on the community partner side of like, why would a community organization want to be engaged in community-engaged research? And it has these sort of benefits. So it can build the capacity of an organization to do policy research. It can help them evaluate different programs. It can amplify the wisdom that's in their community already. It can, on the academic side, it can advance academic theories and research in different ways. So there's a lot of benefits associated with it on both the research and the community side. I should have So in terms of CERi's programs, we have a few. I'm going to talk a bit about some of them in depth, but we've got our graduate student fellowship program, which I'm going to talk a bit more about. Our research funding program, which the panel is actually going to dive into a bit more, I think. Our researcher in residence program, so this is a program where we host researchers at SFU to kind of inform us and work with us on certain projects. A community librarian program, so this is Heather DeForest of the library Nice to see you. If you know a good community engaged researcher, nominate them. And then our 312 research shop, which is coming in January, we're going to launch, and that was a partnership with Mitacs that we're developing, where that is going to be, it's kind of, I think of it as a step from our fellowship program, which is like if you're kind of a graduate student that's done our fellowship program, it's not necessary that you have, but you're interested in community engaged research and want to practice it. The research shop is a place to do that, where we facilitate research services for community organizations on like a fairly bounded time frame and output. So if an organization is looking for, like, say, a literature review or a policy review, or they want to assess one of their programs, or they want an environmental scan, they could come to the research shop. We hire a grad student to do that work for them over like a semester or two. So we're just setting up the infrastructure for that program now. So please do check back with us in January if that's of interest. Our fellowship program, I'll just go through this quickly. I encourage you all to apply. We'll be opening applications in April, I believe. $3,000 in research funding, monthly workshops from September to April. You can book space here for meetings or whatever you might need. Get publicity for your research through our networks, support and mentorship, and community building, which we always hear back from the students that community building is, apart from the stipend, is the best part, and I agree. It's just, especially post-COVID, it's so wonderful to be in this space with other people talking about really important issues together. Our SERi funding program, I was going to talk a bit about the South Vancouver Neighborhood House Project, but I think I'll maybe leave that because I hope you guys will talk about it on the panel and maybe it'll come up. So I don't want to take up too much time on that. Our publications, some of them are on the back table over there in paper form, so please check them out. They're all on different aspects of community engaged research, they're kind of different partnerships. Quiet Alarm was a partnership we did with the Climate Emergency Unit on climate reporting. Community engaged research on the climate crisis with a symposium that we did, and then we wrote up all the findings from the community of people that had gathered. Walk With Me is our work on a community response to the opioid crisis, the drug poisoning crisis, especially as it affects small towns in BC. And then Public Policy Collage is like an arts-based method for public policy research. So those are just a few. We also, our director, Em Johal, has a podcast called The Lupa Radar, where he talks about a lot of different political and social issues, but we have quite a few community engaged research podcasts associated with that, with different topics. So it's a good place to sort of learn in that podcast modality. You can check those out on our website as well, I think under the resource section. And I just want to highlight our community resource handbook. So if you are kind of new to community engaged research, this is a really good resource. I think we have some of them back. It's just like an introductory kind of like, what are the basics, like what are the basic methods, ethics, what are some examples at SFU, that kind of thing. Our events and workshops, so we've done a lot. I won't talk about them all, but they're there, and we're going to be continuing to do more of them as the year goes on. And then just a plug for our next event, which is November 22nd, where we'll be diving into the Quiet Alarm report with a panel of people, journalists, and academics from media to talk about what is the role of the media in the climate crisis to the themes of what's in the report. So with that, it was a lot of information, but I just wanted to, we're doing a lot, and I just wanted to kind of give you a sense of what's out there in terms of our work. And
I have two different collaborations. So we have one from the health sciences and we have one from gerontology coming together today. And so for me, this feels like sort of part of my regular day, sort of being in the middle of like these different perspectives that come together for these projects. And so I thought we could maybe just start with what the individual projects are and who you are sort of on these projects. So maybe because I'm sort of sitting right in the middle of like this particular group, maybe you can all introduce yourselves and we'll sort of go from there about what the project is that you're working together, what's the challenge that you've sort of come together to address.
Sure, I can sure. So my name's Kate Hosford, and just finished my PhD in the Faculty of Health Sciences. And my area of research was in urban aging, specifically on seniors transportation. Should we just do introductions and then I can go about it?
For sure, absolutely. Okay, and I'm Des Pittman. I'm with United Way, British Columbia. I'm a senior regional community developer. My area is basically Metro Vancouver, and I've been lucky enough to work with both Kate and Megan from SFU in the project. I'm going to leave to Kate to describe.
I'm Megan Winters. I'm a professor in the Faculty of Health Sciences, but I'm also an associate in urban studies and in gerontology, so FASS is a comfortable space for me as well. And I've been at SFU for 12 years, and this is one project that I do that's community engaged work, and one example of projects that I do that's Mitacs, and I will let them tell you about this project, but I've also done many other ones over the years.
So we actually have two projects, two Mitacs, but I'll start with the first one. So it's 2 years ago, Bev was looking for a student to help out with various initiatives at United Way, and there was two specific things that I helped out with. The first was there was this provincial consultation on seniors transportation that United Way was hosting, and so I helped prepare some slides for that and wrote the summary report from that event. And then second part to that Mitacs was doing these case studies on different promising models of seniors transportation, and this was an ask that came from a provincial working group on seniors transportation that Bev was hosting, and they wanted to identify different promising practices in the community-based sector for seniors transportation. So that was what I did in 2021, I think. And then from that, we developed a second application that was funded by both Mitacs and CIHR, and that second project was looking at exploring how the Canadian longitudinal study on aging data might be useful for the community-based senior services sector. Those were the two.
Anything that you two want to add to the project?
I can provide a bit more context.
Sure.
So at United Way, we are a charitable organization. Probably most people know United Way is a charitable organization, but we raise funding from the community in order to do the community development work. And we work with various vulnerable populations, older adults, low income in particular, fall into that category. And I'm on the Healthy Aging team. We now work across BC in trying to build a sector that will support older adults as they age, and mostly to age in place. So we do lots of research, actually. We commission research with people like Spark BC. We fund organizations like the Center for Elder Law. There was very much a community-based participatory research project done on older women living with poverty. I do research sort of on the spot in the course of doing my work every day with community-led seniors planning tables, for example, or a community asset mapping project. There's a kind of research there if you stretch it a bit, and I'll leave it there. Except to say that we were working with a big grant at United Way from the Vancouver Foundation, a systems change grant that had to do with transportation for seniors. And it was into this Seniors on the Move project, which we were doing together with BEST, the Better Environmentally Sound Transportation, that Kate stepped, and she worked with the Seniors Advisory Council for that. And at the same time, so paralleling this, there was also a provincial working group on seniors transportation that United Way struck after we learned from seniors and senior serving organizations across BC that this was a huge challenge, like number 2 after affordable housing for older adults, especially low income. So I'm the support staff for this, I think, 18-person provincial working group, again comprised mostly, not entirely, by seniors. And it was into that group too that Kate stepped with her research. Like that helps.
Yeah.
So I'm just to tell you, because you might wonder how do these things come about. In this just started my role. And then we worked together on that, and we crossed paths here and there across different projects in different ways. And then we were at a community gathering, like hosted by the Neighbor Collective for people and affiliated partners in a park with some potluck probably. And Bev said, "Oh, I really have this, like, I really would benefit from a little help on this project." And I feel like I just heard it and was like, "Oh, that's exactly what Kate's gonna be good at." And then they sort of took it from there. But the origins, what I want to say is it started a long time ago with a like relationship that sort of built and brewed and passed in different rooms. And then there was just a moment where connections happened that were the right timing and the right place to answer a partner's need.
And I can say, I guess I was more predisposed than other community developers at United Way to engage with the university professor and student because I used to work at SFU as a professor. So I was interested in that reason as well.
Wonderful, thank you. I think you also both raised like two like really interesting pieces that I want to come back with. One with regards to where some of the funding is coming from, like before basically Mitacs even steps in, like just sort of for some understanding of where some of the challenges maybe lie for some of the community partners that come into these projects. And then Megan, I think, made a really good point too about that relationships are often like the origin point indeed for these projects. So I took a note of that so that we can come back to that. I have a feeling there's some overlap probably between the other project too. So maybe I'll hand it over to you three. Like, would you introduce yourselves and sort of a little bit about your project?
Yeah, I can go first. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Abdul Zahir. I'm a research project manager at SFU, and I've been seconded to support the Civic Innovation Lab, which is still a relatively new non-profit society that's been co-founded by both the City of Burnaby and SFU to really centralise and advance and support research partnerships and research collaborations that occur between our two entities.
Hi, I'm Habib Chaudhry. I'm a professor in gerontology at SFU. Just in case you're wondering what is gerontology, it's study of aging, social, psychological, physiological aspects of aging and older adults. Maybe just briefly comment on three projects that we have been involved in with Mitacs support. And one was with intergenerational programs with North Shore, and we can come back to each of these or just one if you want to focus on one at this point. The first one was an interesting project where it was supported by CERi, and then Mitacs supported it. So it's looking at intergenerational programs, initiatives on the North Shore, and how we can create a resource hub in the North Shore. It was really community engaged. It wasn't really engaged in the classic sense. It was like initially, they approached SFU, and then we became interested as well. The second project is with Providence Healthcare, Providence Living, and that's also a very fascinating project where there is a dementia village being built on Vancouver Island, and we are partnered with Providence Health and Mitacs supported in looking at how the village is going to function, make lives of people with dementia, older adults living in the care home better. And the third project that we focus more on is the Demscape project, which is really looking at the neighborhood environment and how the neighborhood built environment impacts people living with dementia, cognitive declines, their mobility, participation, engagement, and so on. So that's a project that we'd like to focus more on as we get into more details. So we can come back to that. Pass it on to Carrie.
Hi everyone, I'm Carrie. I am a super freshly minted master's, I guess not a student, and not even but from the Department of Gerontology at SFU as well. And we kind of bring an unusual or sort of a flipped approach where we started with a project. And I was working with Habib as project manager on the Demscape project. And then as we transitioned into phase 2, focusing on knowledge mobilization, it really made sense to find a way to carve out some more time for community engagement, because we've created these amazing knowledge mobilization tools. So dementia inclusive design and planning guidelines geared toward municipal planners, as well as a short awareness raising and advocacy documentary video, which ended up becoming quite a large part of my work on Denscape, and it was a real honor and great experience to co-create a documentary with some of our study participants, as well as sort of seeing how to co-create an awareness raising video with professional videographers, but also trying to really keep the perspective of the participants in mind as well. So through the support of Mitacs and the Alzheimer's Society of BC, I get to embark on a community engaged research project, developing a film viewing and discussion guide for our short documentary and testing out the questions in 2 world cafes. So one in Burnaby and then one with the City of Richmond as well.
Okay, perfect. Maybe this would be a good point, Abdul, for you to sort of elaborate a little bit on your particular role on this project. I find like the inclusion of like the Civic Innovation Lab quite interesting in this particular one. So maybe you can speak a little bit to that particular stage maybe of the project.
Yeah, for sure. It's actually funny because we work with Habib, but we also work with Megan as well. So it's a bit of a mixed connections, a few mixed connections. Yeah. But yeah, with Denscape and with what the work you're doing, Carrie, there's I think it goes back to your point, Tara, about the spectrum of involvement. And for us, the Civic Innovation Lab, we support a number of different projects in different kind of areas, from climate action to mobility, smart cities, intersectionality, equity, truth and reconciliation, and all those different projects in those different areas need different kinds of support and nuanced approaches. And so for us with Denscape, for instance, it looks a lot like making those connections between academia and the city and the community that the city's engaged with in turn. Providing the resourcing and championing to be able to move that work along, helping to support and organize the World Cafes, for instance. So it looks quite different.
Perfect. I can definitely say that like knowledge mobilization is also like one big piece that I see every day in like the humanities projects that we do, and so there's a lot of that particular stage that organizations need help with. It's also indeed like quite often sort of the what do the real world impacted people sort of feel about a particular service, even like in the terms of tech companies that develop an app where it's what do your users think? Is this doing what you thought it would do or in the way that you're doing it? But one of the questions that I quite often get, and that I'm sort of now happy to actually sort of go give back to all of you is how do these projects get started? So can be the particular one sort of that you're sort of engaged with as you three individually, but like in general, what's the impetus for this particular sort of collaboration maybe to come together as researchers and community partners?
With us and the transportation project is called Seniors on the Move. It's supposed to speak to movements of 2 different kinds. It came from communities across BC. We had consultations in 12 communities about 4 years ago now. And so it was seniors putting a voice to the biggest issues in their lives and the issues that they wanted us to respond to with Ministry of Health dollars. So it was in response to that. Wrote the grant application, you know the procedure, and instruct the seniors advisory committees and provincial working group in that work.
And I think for me, like prior to Megan and Bev crossing paths and kind of making the connection that we need a student to help with this provincial working group, I was wanting to work on something that was a bit more tangible, a bit more in the community, and just like a change up from being purely in the academic space. And so I can't remember if I quite mentioned that to Megan, but just like I didn't know that it would be this, but I just kind of had that feeling of I just want to work on a project that is like concrete, that's coming like an external ask and then I can just execute it. And that first one very much was that, and I really enjoyed responding to a community versus putting my own research question out there.
So my research lab is called the City's Health and Active Transportation Research Group, and I lead like very applied research, often with municipalities, but often with community organizations. I was just trying to come up with all the Mitacs projects that have been funded through this, but just, so like one was with Hub Cycling, who used to be based in this building. I guess the origin story of that was like, you know, they're always without capacity to do data analysis, and my students are with capacity to do data analysis. So it comes to like me understanding how to scope a project and then listening to what their needs are and matchmaking it. So I did one with Hub, did one with Moby the bike share. They also were like, oh gosh, I mean, what do we do once we get the data? I was like, okay, I can help you with that one too. And then there's one right now that is just wrapped up with Level Up Consulting, who's a women-led consulting group that works on social equity and a lot around equity and justice projects. And so we're looking at that. So they're like a small consultancy group who really has just sort of only so much capacity. And I had a student on my team who's trained as a planner, has a really strong background, and we're looking at like, this project is just absolutely grown and ballooned because it's going so, it's like the perfect, it's just a match that's taking off, is what I would say. So a scan of like how cities consider equity frameworks, and then that's moved into like, how could cities, like city staff actually do this in their day-to-day work? Like what tangible steps can they do to advance equity work, whether they're like a, you know, engineer or a program analyst or like any level in that city. So that project has just really, is been fairly big in the last year. I'm really grateful to Mitacs for this automatic extension or like ease of extension to extend a project rather than have to restart all the
We're
paperwork.
trying to make things a little bit easier.
Yeah, so if you need a success story, this one really worked under those conditions. So those are 3 examples. Your answer was, how does it come about? Like I sit in lots of different rooms with different organizations, and I think it's just if you're listening for it, they have needs, and if you can like put that into a project and say, what would that look like? What would a deliverable look like that would suit you? What timeline do you really need for this to happen? And then you kind of need to bring the right student forward.
So from the student's perspective, then that might also be, if you are in the same spaces of like the issue that you're passionate about and meet other people working in that space, that's
Right.
sort of a good
So like this last example that I said was really taking off, I would say the student just was like, well, I kind of think this would be a great next step. And I was like, well, off you guys go then. So they, you know, Victoria and I were talking, and this would be a great next step. And that really grew. And I would say that Kate was really, you know, the several projects, you know, that grew out of their own conversations, right? So you don't need a supervisor to start this for you. It might help you get started, but they can also come out of yours.
Sorry, just to interrupt.
jump in. Yeah.
So from the student's perspective, is it that we might find an open project, for example, with Mitacs, and it's interesting and we could apply, but perhaps we're not meeting like 1 or 2 criterias. Should we still apply, or is it kind of like a federal government application where if you don't meet the criteria, don't even bother? Okay.
So for our open project, it's basically an organization, so like United Way, who basically doesn't necessarily have a relationship with the researcher yet. So they come to us and say, can you help us find something? So one of the things we do outside of actually personally connecting with relevant faculty is indeed we post it online. Most often, this is a general idea that the organization has. This is a challenge we're trying to address. And so quite often there is indeed some flexibility in that how or what exactly, and quite often it is shaped by the researchers who are coming on and ask just really good questions about, well, have you considered this? Or like, well, if you want input from, you know, like your community, how do you want to go about gathering that information, and have you considered involving them in the process? And there's lots of different ways in which that input is good. So I would say definitely like apply to open projects. I think the bigger challenge is always, as graduate students, so I have a degree in English, we tend to be very niche in what we do. And so some of the challenge is to think a little bit broader than your thesis in some of these conversations. And then maybe this would be a good moment for you to actually jump in, Kate, too, if you want to sort of like.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah,
In terms of how these things come about. Yeah, it's very much either way. There are projects, and then students can look online and see if there's something of interest, if it falls, roughly in your area of study or even just an interest or even a set of skills that you have but maybe aren't using in other ways, or it can be, you know, driven by a faculty member who's maybe got, you know, a research program that connects in really obvious ways to community partners. Maybe they already have some of those connections. Maybe the job is to figure out what those potential connections are. So it's a pretty open field, you know, in terms of what's possible. And a lot of it's gonna just come down to how concrete your ideas are, what your passion is. Does it link up with something that already exists, or with a faculty member and a community partner that already have an existing relationship, where you build it up from you know, from the ground up, if that's comfortable for you to do that.
I can speak to that one real quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, with my PhD research and getting a Mitacs grant then, I was already involved with apathy and scoring, so that's kind of another group that I feel like you're gesturing towards. Is like, I already had a relationship with them, which the relationships are really important, obviously, and they needed research to help them apply for federal grants, but didn't have the research like capacity on their team at that point. And they knew me already, and I was like, well, I'm doing my PhD and I'm doing it on a topic that intersects with the mandate of your organization. I could do, I did a piece of research on evaluation of one of their programs, which then they used to apply for the next grant to like renew that program. And then I went on, and that went well, and then I think the next year I worked with them on developing their theory of change. So that pulled on a lot of the political theoretical work I was doing of like, how does a political youth organization make change at a national level that's funded by government? Like, there's kind of a complexity there that I helped them work through. So it grew out of that, but I guess I'm just saying, like, if you already have relationships with organizations or with the topic or an issue, that's a good place to start, to kind of, if you're doing this self-initiated project type thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example, and I think that's something that I promote to our students in the department. If you think about, I'm assuming most of you, all of you are graduate students, right? So you're doing a thesis, some capstone project. Is there an applied component to what you're doing, and who would be a community stakeholder for that topic? Who would benefit from it? Either policy, program, some connection that you can make. And if you can reach out to them, in your case, you reached out or you had a partnership already there. But if you don't have an existing partnership, you could reach out and say, would you be interested in being part of this project that I'm going to engage in, and are the topics that you would be interested in? And then maybe bring it up, not maybe, you need to bring it up with your supervisor and then see, because that's another piece of, I think Mitacs does a great job in engaging students and faculty as well, and so does CERi. But there are still faculty who are not quite aware of these options, at least I mean FASS. So if your supervisor is already knowledgeable about Mitacs, that's great, but it's possible they might not be. And you can present that as an option, that I want to do this project, would you be interested in supporting this particular Mitacs application, which is not that complicated. I mean, it is reasonable work that will be part of your thesis.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, that's where we're so lucky to have Anne and have the support for especially faculty members who are unfamiliar, and some will be a little resistant. I don't do that. I do tri-council funding only, and that's all I know how to do. And it can be a bit of a change for sure. And in fact, you need to have a faculty member there to supervise you. So I think that's also really important, is to know that there are these resources that are available to all students in FASS to help, and I'm also there to help to reassure faculty members who are unfamiliar. Yes, this is something we absolutely do, and lots of people are doing. And here are lots of examples, right here in this room, of excellent research that's being done to kind of bring people on, because it is a new idea for especially faculty who've been used to a fairly small funding world.
Some of these projects sound like they are sort of single person, and I know the work that the research shop that CERi's setting up is not, but just an example of one I'm involved in, the Hey Neighbor Collective. I mentioned it briefly, but this is like a cluster of Mitacs. Like maybe there's 14 in there. I I have no idea. So Atia Mahmood is the lead from gerontology, and Meg Holden from urban studies, and then Center for Dialogue really manages it within the Hey Neighbor Collective. So this is a very fast, and I have the privilege of having one student slotted in there. But it actually means there's this whole team of Mitacs interns who are working together, and there has been for years. So there's sort of some training and precedence and community around it as well. So I think there's, I don't know if there's pros and cons to that. It's something to say you have peers around you as well. And sometimes you're working together. So I know like a large number of them are out collecting data or doing surveys in buildings, and so there's sort of teams of them working together. And so if you're fearful of being the like single alone person here, there's models of this and sort of a stable profile. So some students have done sort of multiple Mitacs internships with them, sort of 2 or 3 funding across the time of their research. And so it feels like a lot to get started on for 6 months. I think these things really tend to repeat themselves once, you know, when they're working well.
Just a quick question, I guess. Just going back to really tying the question back to engaging with the community stakeholders. So let's say you'd like to partner with the Musqueam community, and the slides briefly mentioned methods or keeping in mind to decolonize methods. There's no like 101 on how to do that, like as far as I'm concerned. And so how does that approach look, I guess, to coordinate with Indigenous communities and yet still being responsible and ethical and professional all at the same time?
There's no short answer there. That's I would suggest you take a course on research.
Is there a course?
Yeah.
I can give a plug to CERi here. I do.
I don't know Siri.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I'm thinking of Jamie Fisher. So one of my PhD students went through CERi's fellowship program, and the project that she was really passionate about working on at that time was around supporting Cowichan tribes, which faces a lot of, so on Vancouver Island, and she had a relationship with leaders there who were supporting Indigenous youth in getting to the places they needed to go to because there's no transportation options and it's not safe to be walking and cycling on the side of those roads there. And like 38% of Indigenous people who live in that area have access to a vehicle or take trips by car. Okay, so there was like a huge transportation gap. And so I think like through the process of doing her CERi fellowship course, she really, she is Indigenous, but she got a lot of sort of guidance on how to approach that project and try and take it forward. It absolutely had hiccups. It did not turn out to be the thing that she thought it was going to be, but I think that's a part of decolonizing the research paradigm as well. Mm-hmm. And I think what I wanted to put out there was that the CERi fellowship was a helpful way for her to work her way into that project. And I think she will continue in the future.
It depends on the community and the project and the extent to which you have to build trust and I would say building trust and relationship is foundational. I've heard often like it's this figuring out like how to approach. Like, so some people have said like you need to be invited in. Others have said the opposite, where you can just approach. Yeah, we've been talking with Musqueam on a housing issue because they're looking to retrofit a lot of the homes on the Musqueam territory, and in that case, like the housing officer came to one of our events, and they were just like, "We want to meet with," like it was just kind of like that type of thing. Like we want to meet with you, like we want to have a researcher come in, and that was. But then other projects and communities, it's a much different story where you have to know somebody that invites you in to. So it really depends. I guess my takeaway would just be proceed with care and be mindful of relationships.
So just gonna add an additional resource for decolonization. The RRC often has a lot of workshops and presenters come in which present on like Indigenous methodologies or decolonization. And like, if you haven't taken certain like cultural sensitivity kind of workshops like Sanyas and stuff like that, those are also great resources to help with just getting kind of mindset to be able to bridge those relationships.
I come from Mexico City, and the social issues are so different than here. I'm about here for a year and a half. So question is to approach the issue. In this case, the issue approached you, or you see the issue. In case of the elders, right? Do you approach as to give help to the people so they can be elders that are capable to move, or you approach in another way, I think you did, to give the opportunities for them to move easily around the city, right? So my question is about how do you approach an issue? First, that you are not related totally to it, and then second, that probably the community has, in case of the First Nation, has all the words that need to be said about the issue.
Yeah, I want to say, Megan sort of addressed some of this before, like if you're part of the communities that work in that space, so by sort of showing up to events that try to work on a space. So say, if we go back to the issue of food security, right, there's fantastic organizations around Vancouver that work in that space on various different levels, checking out what they are doing, going to events where they're attending and actually trying to understand what it is that they are trying to solve, and then coming in with what you can offer, right, is one sort of way, and sort of meeting sort of those communities. And I was wondering too if so both the United Way and I don't know, I'm assuming the Alzheimer's Society of BC as well, like work also like with vulnerable populations. So we're not talking necessarily indigenous, but it's also like in comparison, like there's often a bit of a barrier for like us who are very privileged at being right attendants or members at SFU and might have a very different sort of background. And so are there general sort of suggestions you would have or that you encounter sort of in your work with the team on how to be mindful of those differences or how to be open to learning and anything that students should maybe sort of try to practice or embody?
Well, from our side, I think Kerry can talk about not a particular organization per se, but in our Denscape project, we're looking at people living with cognitive decline. So, a vulnerable population, right? So, and it is, it can be challenging to engage that particular group of people because of, the research can be challenging, and then there are cognitive issues that come in the way, and then families can be part of that, and maybe the person with lived experience would want to participate, the family would say, well, maybe not, it's a good idea. So we face a lot of those issues as part of our project. So Kerry, do you want to share some of the issues that we had?
Yeah. So we definitely also had a historical factor with trying to complete recruitment on the tails of COVID-19 restrictions. So several of those community-based senior serving programs, especially for older adults living in the community with dementia or Alzheimer's, those were postponed and not started. So our key community groups that we would normally go and give a brief recruitment presentation, we had to sort of adapt and still work with those community connections. So senior services organizations, like a great ally has been the Burnaby Seniors, Burnaby Senior Services, BSOS. I've got the acronym, but I don't have the full name. And yes, so good. And because we were using kind of innovative mixed methods, we were already thinking about, okay, we've got nice cameras, how do we use our videography equipment? So I filmed a brief recruitment video and was able to send that out in several of our community organizations who had expressed support being able to work with those ongoing connections, but instead of giving an in-person presentation, which is of course ideal, being able to send out a short, like less than 5-minute recruitment video with their monthly newsletters. And then thankfully, things did get easier as programs went back to being in person, but a leg of our study is also in northern BC through the University of Northern British Columbia, and recruitment was a huge challenge. Just with less community services people living in more, single family dwellings, with, where they have to drive, and just less of that community support. So it was certainly a time consuming and, process that took a lot of creative thinking. So, although it did take time, which isn't always something you have access to when you're doing a super short-term 3 or 6 month project, finding ways to still work with those community connections is essential.
Our organization is quite embedded in the community, and an example of how that works when it comes to the folks who eventually provide information to researchers like Kate is we have a leadership council that is BC-wide, comprised of volunteers. Most of them are older adults, or it tends to be executive directors of ESOS, that equivalent team. And those people are already in the sector, knowledgeable about the communities that they live in across BC, and we make a point of getting that representation across BC. And then it's to them that we go when it comes to asking advice for the makeup of the working group, the provincial working group. So they identify to ask people they know, who think would be very knowledgeable and good in the position. And it's those kinds of people that come together, and then Kate in turn has a conversation, a structured conversation that is for research.
One of the things that I'm curious what Abdul's thought of this is the Civic Innovation Lab is a wonderful project initiative partnership between SFU and City of Burnaby, right? So that was City of Burnaby, which is fantastic that SFU has access to City of Burnaby through this opportunity. But if we extend this lab idea to organizations, in this case Burnaby, community-based organizations who might be interested in doing research. So like having an open database that if your organization is interested in research, what would you be interested in doing research in partnership with SFU, please sign up, right? So like the question about how do we find as students, even faculty, find what's going on. So we try to build a partnership, and it takes time and trust and whatnot. But how about an opening that would invite organizations to come and say, I'm interested in this, and maybe it would be easier, like a way to reach out in some ways. So I think there was some initiative, maybe with United Way, I'm not remembering well. There was some discussion about something like this to create a VC, but I don't remember who started that, but I don't think it went very far. But yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are.
Like you've been soothing on my computer or something.
Yeah.
Exactly like one of the conversations we've been having and kind of thinking about is how can we fulfill that function of making sure that the people and organizations that have need are matched with the people and organizations and parties that can fill that need, right? And not just between academia and municipality, but also community organizations that the lab might have connections with, or community organizations that the city might have connections with, or community organizations that people within those different entities might have kind of personally or kind of semi-professionally. Like how do we bring all those to the light and make sure that those people are finding each other? So that's the thing that we're really thinking about. The thing I'd add to that is, and this is especially, I think, salient for students, is that I think it's easy to assume disinterest in what you're working on. And I think a big part of that is kind of the inferiority imposter syndrome. That's it. Inferiority complex is something else I guess I'm dealing with. The imposter syndrome that I think is just kind of perniciously in the back of your head all the time when you're a student. But I'd say, and it's easy to say and hard to do, but assume interest, because there's so much kind of energy and willingness to be able to work on things like this out there that you really don't think about it until you're immersed in it, right? A lot of the stuff a lot of the projects that people are working on, people want to work on, are things they're kind of doing off the side of their desk because there isn't capacity institutionally to promote that kind of R&D, like to champion that sort of work, to resource it. But one of our functions is to be that party, right? And we've seen that there is so much appetite in different community organisations, different people in the city, especially. Like before I worked for the Civic Innovation Lab, I would have assumed that, you know, if you're familiar with Parks and Rec, like everyone's a bit of a Ron Swanson there. But there is so much Leslie Knope energy. Particularly true in the city of Burnaby, probably elsewhere, I'm sure. But it's just willing to be kind of absorbed and turned into something productive and impactful. Yeah, so I'm just saying, kind of.
I think you've gotten at sort of my personal secret that I'm now sharing with all of you. Go talk to people.
Yeah.
Right? Like you learn a lot sort of from each other, but also like by having conversations with people, sometimes it's really in unexpected places that you get connected to somebody, but there's really a lot of potential there. One of the ways in which you can go about it is on our website, which is going to get an update, so I don't know where you'll find it once it's updated, but overall, we have a list of all of our past projects. So you can actually look at who were the partners on previous projects, who were the supervisors, who were the students, right? And through the help of the internet by now, we can all find each other, and you can reach out and say, hey, I was really interested in this, I would really like to learn how did you go about building this relationship, are you still in touch with them? Like, there's many ways in which you can learn from the people who have done projects with the communities you're interested in. But I thought maybe Carrie and Kate, you can also sort of share, it's like, having done this work now for like sort of several years, you've started, like, are there suggestions for students where you would say like, what I've learned is, this is sort of what I would give along with you, either in terms of when to start, or where to start, or what to keep in mind that you go like, oh yeah, I didn't realize that until I was sort of in the middle of it. Anything you want to sort of like share in terms of advice?
I think just that it feels really rewarding. I think to go into it being a bit flexible about what you might do, and I think the first project for me was really rewarding because it was an ask from the community versus a researcher-led project. So I really enjoyed that one, and that it might set you a bit back from your timelines for your master or your graduate studies, but it was so worth it. I spent an extra semester of my master's doing Mitacs and really valued that. And then in my PhD, I think it probably sped me along actually to do the community-engaged research because it allowed me to identify what were actual problems in the community. So it didn't impede my progress. Yeah, that's just some takeaways. Thank you. How would you, Carrie?
Yeah, I would love to throw in, if you're near the end of your graduate student journey, don't let that discourage you from applying. I knew I was getting close, and for me, I think I'm kind of an unusual graduate fellowship candidate in that Demscape was my primary work, and my graduate student research was totally unrelated. I actually did grief and bereavement support for staff in long-term care homes, a scoping review. So very much not related to neighborhood built environment at all. And yeah, that openness to explore other parts of your interests that you might not know were there. Because I definitely didn't see my work with Demscape blossoming into now a 2+ year like work, like professional work. So with that being said, at the same time, trying not to look at compartmentalizing the work, and I think that the applied skills from really getting into community engaged research can help you in every aspect of your career as you enter the workforce. So for me, the knowledge mobilization side of things, that was one of those like, this seems interesting, and I didn't know how immersed I was gonna get into it. And yeah, knowing that those are skills that you can apply, like for my master's project, I developed infographics for long-term care staff, but I also used stakeholder consultation. So being able to work with my contacts from long-term care, because my former life is as an art therapist in long-term care, so just really looking at ways to practice community-engaged research in all of these facets of my professional life.
Amazing. I also want to say like Mitacs can actually support you if you're graduating during the project, or even if you graduate before you started. It's a little bit institution dependent, but you're very lucky. SFU is like really, really great in way you would
or actually more from experience with a student who was going to do a Mitacs project and for reasons that were unrelated to the project itself couldn't actually complete. But it's a little bit opposite to finding a content area that overlaps and then looking for a community partner and I'm interested in this, so I'll work with this group. For her, she actually had a bunch of skills that were kind of unrelated to content that could be applied in any content area and ended up getting fairly far along the completion of a proposal for doing research on an area she'd never had any exposure to, but she had all these skills that were so desirable. So that's another thing to be thinking about, that you have a set of skills that you might not even be totally aware you have that are very, very interesting to a potential community partner because they don't have those skills. So that's one way to think about it too. It doesn't necessarily have to overlap. Like it's been said already, it doesn't need to be related to your research. Like in your case, Gary, it wasn't totally related to your research, but you have skills that you might actually be really surprised and get into a content area that you'll end up loving. It could take you, anywhere. So there's simply
imposter syndrome, I think.
Yeah, well, that doesn't go away, by the way. I'll stick around.
You might, I don't know about that.
Does anybody want to have like the last word sort of for the official sort of like fireside chat? As I said, like we have some more time, we have a lot more food, so we can all stick here and gather and like we can just go to the exact person that you were been curious to find more of. But do we have any last sort of things? Yeah, sorry, both of you.
Yeah, I guess, so I moved here for my master's program, and so all my contacts are not in the province. So I don't know if anyone has an experience or like has advice to share on like, I know that there's a lot of great, and like my background is also in community work, so I know that there's probably like a lot of great community orgs around here, but I don't have any connections with them yet, so like any advice on how to do that?
Well, I can just jump in and say like that, like you can potentially do projects with your communities back home. So it really depends a little bit on your area. Like, do you have to be there in person, or like does sort of like Carrie sort of like how do we do this during COVID and work? So I do have projects that are actually across different provinces, so that is a potential. Like, is it enough to just do a few visits to sort of do the components when you're in? So there's different ways, but like at least like from the Mitacs perspective, like that works, and you could use some of the stipend to do some of the traveling. So there's a few opportunities if you sort of want to go back to your communities. But I think Bev also had an idea.
Well, I was thinking of Vancouver and BC. If you're looking for research opportunities here, there's a nonprofit called Vantage Point that can provide you a wonderful overview of the nonprofit community.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, Charity Village online, you can see the jobs that are opening. That also will give you an idea of new projects. If you're interested in older adults, we have. You can speak to me. But I guess I want, and so I'm encouraging you, and you too. I think I heard some interest, older adults, so feel free to reach out. I just wanted to mention an observation, in case it's anything to the folks here, of our conversation and sort of the tact we took, the drift, if you will. And I thought we were talking about community-based research, and we talked a lot about community engaged. And I think we already know there's a spectrum, but those different words are markers to me on where you are interested in working on the spectrum. So as an example of community-based, I was part of the NBC review committee for CUES, community engagement.
I've done that too, yeah.
I've done that too. And so the best ever community-based, like community-embedded research project that I saw, and it was really unique, we didn't see a lot of these, was from Raycam Community Center, very close by. And what they wanted the grant for, and they wanted to work with the UBC professor on, was the creation of a research group in the downtown east side, in the Strathcona area in particular, to devise the problems that they were going to hire the people who would do the research on they would hire from amongst the community, and so on and so on. So just to give you an idea about the spectrum, there's a real spectrum. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, sorry, I was just gonna sort of capitalize on some of the conversations that we've been having around timing and around community engaged, because kind of we're through the fellowship that, you know, research kind of paces at the speed of trust. And so I guess I'm curious if you find with community engaged projects in general that they tend to be longer, or you have infrastructure places sort of recommend that in order to really do community engaged work well, you kind of recommend like to graduate students to think about like a longer timeline in order to just be able to establish yourself into the community and like think about like, I know that you suggest that you can continue on even after graduating, but maybe even just giving those kind of like general points of guidelines for potential interns around, you know, really getting trust within the community and building it really well.
Well, I guess for them to build their own trust in that, I mean, I think it's like showing up and being there and being a listener there early on. So maybe sometimes students are shy to do that at the beginning. And if there's one thing I tell people, it's like right at the very start, you need to like be there and be a listener, and that's gonna like sort of get to a place where you can find a connection on how you can actually help and what they see your role actually as. So just sort of like a sort of really front load relationship building, whereas I find many students can be hesitant on that front, and then it gets to the end of the 6 months and only then are they ready. So if I say one thing over and over, I'm like, right at the start, you want to do these things and try and facilitate that happening.
And I would say that yes, I think you're right. It will take longer if you spend some time talking to people, getting to know them. Yeah. So bank that in.
I think what we also sometimes see is that organizations sort of get connected to a researcher either through their own channels or through me or my colleagues, and like sometimes they want to do a test project. They want to see, is this relationship working out? We can see we have a shared interest. We can see sort of that there's the necessary skill set to actually help us out, but we don't know how this is going to work. We have to see how this relationship develops, and so we sometimes have it that they say, we'll do one thing for 4 months, and we just see how we get along, and then maybe we'll think of, indeed, particularly like if sort of the faculty member is engaged in it, maybe we'll go from there and then think of something bigger, maybe for 2, and maybe there will be different students come in, and so in some cases it'll be sort of a relationship that the faculty member continues, or in some cases the student actually ends up working with the organization sort of upon graduation because they now know the value of that sort of relationship. But so I do see sometimes that projects start out smaller, and if it's sort of working for every side, then we'll build them up.
This is different. So I want to take advantage of Professor King from Dean's Office and CERi and Mitacs. The issue, and of course the graduate students, because of graduate students' education. Community engaged research, like what CERi is doing, you offer workshops and sessions for fellows, graduate fellows, right? But if you look at the departments, like we have thought about this in our department, but when we talk about graduate education, where do we have an opportunity for students to learn about community engaged research? Right? It's not part of traditional methods courses, right?
Yeah.
So in our department, we have started at the undergraduate level at this point, special topic course. It's one we want to expand to the graduate level. But the question I'm raising, the issue I'm raising is, if you have any thoughts about potentially partnering with CERi and having a course that could be for credit, or encouraging our units within FASS to think about this, because we talk about this informally, we do research on our own inside, but it's not part of our curriculum.
Yeah, that's right. And in some ways it is a culture change that's needed. You know, what I'm seeing now, it's a great idea, by the way, a general course, you know, a faculty level course, or something that's shared, you know, among a couple of units to special topics or something that it could even, grow into something a little bit more stable. I think we're hearing that the students want that. I mean, we've been hearing in many units that have traditionally had quite quantitative approaches to research, saying our students really want qualitative methods, our students really want mixed methods. This is just another, I think, a step along that. So I am hearing that, absolutely. And I think right now is a time that I think the dean's office and the dean in particular would be quite supportive. We're also seeing that just on a professional development front, that we're needing to connect grads to possibilities of applying their skills and their knowledge outside of academia, because there just aren't the jobs. So that is a real culture change, I think, as well. And still, I think there's a lot of work to be done at the unit level, at the faculty level, to kind of re-educate people about what the pathways are now and what's realistic, and building those into programs. So I think there are many ways through formal coursework, curricula, and training, but also professional development, and really capitalizing on Annika and the great work that she's doing, just getting the word out to units and to students and to faculty about what's even possible. So yeah, no, I hear you.
I think that might also be interesting to take to grad studies, like charity, who's also been
Absolutely,
looking
yeah.
for what are our students missing. So even going beyond FASS again to
Yeah, and
think of
getting some of the general
across
skills that are needed,
yeah.
even to, for example, Annika and I have been talking, and Charity Slowboat in grad studies as well, about the need to show students how to network. It's not just giving them networking opportunities for a lot of the reasons we've talked about. It's very anxiety provoking to be thrown into a room full of people that you don't know who might have expertise. The imposter syndrome is real. But there are things that we can do at a general level to provide some of that support and scaffolding for students who whether or not, regardless of what their original intentions are, to go academic track or otherwise, just to provide some of that in our training.
And I think there's some professional development available through Mitacs, because I have one of my PhD students was like right on board with all of the professional development training in Mitacs, and so that thing about these different kinds of skills, so just that hadn't come up.
Yeah.
And I hear some of them are excellent.
They're actually free. Like it goes from project management to time management. There's a few different things in there.
Well, I'm networking too.
There we go.
Given that we sort of ended on the terrifying topic of networking, this seems to be an excellent idea to sort of segue into socializing. What I have learned in my role is that there's a lot of language barriers and semantics as researchers. I think you understand that every time you talk to somebody in a different discipline or faculty, there's just different ways in which we like to talk about it. So I always prefer that we think of it as like relationship building, because networking sort of makes it sound a little bit sort of extractive, or like I'm trying to, like just do it and then I get the business card and then I can check it off my box. So let's think of it sort of maybe more as like mingling, and we'll get to know each other and hopefully stay in touch. Yeah.
So hi everyone, I'm not a student. I'm not a student, so I want to ask if you guys know any opportunities or any spaces to make this engagement, right, outside maybe of the school. If it's open to me also, I can try to participate, on the school purposes.
One fantastic opportunity is talking to Tara later about some of the events that she sort of highlighted that CERi is putting on, because they bring together oftentimes members of the academic community and of different communities out there. And so events like sort of those are open to the public, and SFU is doing several others through their SFU's Advanced City Community Engagement Office. And so most campuses have similar offices, and so there's a lot of events that provide opportunities to meet communities. And that I think we can also probably explore that in more detail. We can talk to Beth about so what is United Way doing? Are you doing anything where can I engage with
Actually, I
your
know the foundation. I really love that.
Good.
Yeah.